everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to tackle something I think we all struggle with a bit. Why is change so hard?
It's a big one.
It really is, but luckily we've got a great book to help guide us through this whole thing. Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard by Chip and Dan Heath.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it's a really good one.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack some of their insights, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll have some really actionable knowledge about how to actually make changes stick, whether it's in your personal life at work or even in your community.
I think what's so fascinating about this topic is, we often look at change as this big, monumental, impossible task,
Right.
And yet we've all gone through massive changes. Like you think about babies entering the world or, decisions like getting married.
Yeah.
People adapt.
Right. And like if we can handle those huge seismic shifts, right?
Yeah.
Why do these smaller things like finally decluttering the closet or sticking to a new workout routine, why does that feel so impossible?
Yeah. And that's the first surprise that the Heath brothers talk about in the book, is that oftentimes we get so stuck on, trying to change behavior when actually the situation needs to change as well.
Oh, interesting.
And they give this example of, imagine trying to quit drinking, but you still go to bars every night.
Oh, yeah.
So it's about recognizing that, the situation, the environment plays a huge role.
Okay, so the environment's a big one, and I love how the book talks about or uses the clocky alarm clock as an example.
Oh, yeah.
The one that runs away from you?
Yeah.
When the alarm goes off?
That's a good one.
It's such a good example.
Well, I think what makes clocky such a good example is because it embodies that second surprise, and that is that our minds are not of one mind.
Oh.
So the Heath brothers have this metaphor of the rider and the elephant.
I love that.
And the rider, is the rational side of our brain. It's
Yeah.
all about planning and logic and analysis.
Okay.
The elephant is the emotional side.
Caught.
It's the seat of all willpower. And so you can see how that plays out with clocky. Your rider sets the alarm for 5:45 a.m., but the elephant is the one hitting the snooze button and burrowing back under the cover.
Every time.
Right. Yeah, they're pulling in opposite directions.
Oh, gosh, I know that's true. Well, I'm definitely more elephant-driven than rider, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's not just about sleep, though, right? I mean, that internal tug of war plays out in so many areas of our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it leads right into surprise number 3, which is that self-control is a finite resource.
Oh, okay.
So, they talk about this experiment in the book where they had college students and they had them resist freshly baked cookies.
Oh, man, that's hard.
While others got to indulge.
Okay.
And afterward, all of them were given a really tough puzzle to solve.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah. And what they found was that the students who had to resist the cookies, they gave up on the puzzle much sooner. And they made fewer attempts than the students who got to eat the cookies.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it illustrates this idea, that we're making, hundreds of choices every day that deplete this resource of self-control.
Yeah, no wonder we're exhausted by like 5 p.m.
Yeah.
So we've got this limited willpower. We only have so much self-control.
Right.
How then do we tackle change knowing this?
Well, the Heath brothers offer this great framework, I think, which is direct the rider, motivate the elephant, and shape the path.
I love a good framework. I'm here for it.
Yeah. And they all work together to actually create lasting change.
Okay, so let's break it down.
Yeah.
Let's start with directing the rider.
Okay.
What are some strategies that we can use to kind of harness that logical side of our brains?
Well, one that I find particularly insightful is this idea of finding the bright spots.
Okay.
And it sounds counterintuitive, but instead of, dwelling on the problems, we should be looking for instances of success, no matter how small they are, and replicating them.
Okay, so the book talks about Jerry Sternin in Vietnam, and he was tasked with tackling childhood malnutrition, which is a huge problem.
Right.
And instead of focusing on, what was going wrong, he looked for those rare cases where kids were thriving despite all of the, challenges.
Yeah, and those bright spots held these crucial clues, right?
Yeah.
Like he found that the mothers of these healthy kids were adding these tiny shrimp and crabs to their meals, which wasn't a typical practice. And so by focusing on what was working and then replicating it, he was able to make, significant progress.
So finding solutions within the problem.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
The book also mentions Bobby, who was a troubled schoolboy,
Yeah.
whose behavior improved drastically through this thing called solution-focused therapy.
Yeah.
And again, the therapist didn't dwell on his issues, but instead focused on identifying positive behaviors from his good days and then replicating those.
Yeah. It's about finding what's working and then doing more of that.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, think about your own challenges. What are some of your bright spots? What's working, even in just a small way? And that's a good question. I'm going to have to think about that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so finding the bright spots is just one strategy, though, right?
Right.
What are some other ways that we can direct the writer?
Another critical step is what they call scripting, the critical moves. And so this is all about taking that big change and breaking it down into smaller, concrete actions to give that writer a clear roadmap.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So instead of saying, I want to get in shape, you say, I'm going to walk for 30 minutes 3 times a week, or I'm going to swap out sugary drinks for water.
It's like giving your writer the GPS with turn-by-turn directions.
Exactly.
Instead of just the destination.
Exactly.
Oh, right.
And the Heath brothers illustrate this beautifully with this story of Alexandra Bering, who is this guy who was brought in to turn around this failing Brazilian railroad company.
Okay.
And he was facing just this massive challenge. They had, a depleted bank account. The railroad was in shambles.
So where do you even begin?
Well, where do you even begin? Right. And so instead of getting bogged down in all of that, he set these 4 very simple rules to guide all investment decisions.
Okay.
And these rules essentially became his critical moves.
Wow.
They allowed him to unblock revenue and minimize any upfront cash needs. And it's fascinating because within 3 years, the railroad went from a significant loss to a healthy profit.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a turnaround.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've given the writer a clear roadmap with the critical moves.
Right.
But to really get them motivated, we need to make sure they can see where they're going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That brings us to the third element of directing the writer, which is pointing to the destination.
Okay.
And so it's about, providing this vivid picture of the end goal, something that really inspires the elephant to get on board and persevere.
The book talks about Crystal Jones, this Teach for America teacher.
Oh, yeah.
Who set this really ambitious goal of having her first grade class reading at a 3rd grade level by the end of the year. And that really clear destination, I mean something tangible and inspiring.
Right.
That became kind of a rallying cry for both her and her students.
It did, and it worked.
Yeah.
She fostered this whole scholar culture in her classroom.
Cool.
And instilled this sense of pride and excitement in learning.
Mm-hmm.
But the key takeaway here is that, that destination has to be meaningful to everyone involved.
Right.
Not just the leader.
Right. So the book contrasts that with another 1st grade teacher whose goals were specific, but they were really only meaningful to her.
Right.
Like keeping up with her lesson plan schedule. But the students were uninspired by that.
Right. Yeah. So I'm curious, what's your 3rd grade reading level goal?
Mm-hmm.
What's the destination that really inspires you to push forward?
Ooh, that's a good one. I might have to think about that.
Yeah.
I can already see how crucial that sense of purpose is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in directing the writer.
We have.
But what about the elephant?
Yeah.
How do we motivate that emotional powerhouse to embrace change?
That's the big question.
That's where we head next. Okay, so we've talked all about directing the writer, but change is rarely a purely logical process, right?
Right.
Emotions are a huge part of this too.
It's huge.
So how do we get the elephant, that emotional side, on board with making a change?
That's where things get really interesting, I think.
Okay.
The elephant, it needs to be motivated. It can't just be directed.
Okay.
And the book has some brilliant strategies for this. And one that I found really compelling was this story about Target.
Okay.
How they went from this kind of bland retailer to this design-focused powerhouse.
Oh, yeah, totally. I remember when the shift happened, it was Target suddenly became cool.
Yeah.
But how did they do that? It's not like they could just order people to embrace this whole new look.
Right, exactly. And it's a great example of how to motivate the elephant without relying solely on authority.
Okay.
And so the book highlights Robin Waters, who was really kind of the spearhead of this shift in their trend department.
Okay.
And, she didn't have the power to force this change, but she found these very creative ways to inspire it.
So how did she win over hearts and minds? Did she give this big rousing speech about the importance of good design or something?
No, not at all. She took a very different approach and really tapped into this power of emotion and visuals.
Okay.
So instead of dry presentations and spreadsheets, she used things like, brightly colored M&Ms.
Okay.
Those sleek new iMacs.
Uh-huh.
To make her vision tangible and exciting.
So it was like showing, not just telling.
Yeah, showing, not telling. Exactly.
That's brilliant. And so by like creating this emotional connection to the change, she kind of bypassed all that analytical resistance.
Yeah, exactly.
So it sounds like logic alone isn't enough. We need to find the feeling.
Right.
To really motivate the elephant. So if our listeners are out there, trying to change someone's mind, whether it's a teenager, a colleague, a friend, maybe logic isn't the way to go. How can they find the feeling? How can they make the change, tangible and appealing?
Those are great questions. And I think another really powerful strategy for motivating the elephant is what the Heath brothers call shrinking the change.
Okay.
And, we've talked about how we have limited self-control.
Right.
And, big changes can feel incredibly daunting.
Yeah, it's like that feeling of being overwhelmed before you even start.
Exactly.
Like when you look at a messy room and you're like, nope, I'm just going to get back in bed.
Right, exactly. And so shrinking the change is all about breaking down those daunting tasks into smaller, more manageable steps.
Okay.
And they have this great example in the book about these hotel maids who lost weight without even trying.
Wait, what? How is that possible?
It's fascinating, right?
Yeah.
And so, they didn't, install treadmills in the hallways or anything.
Okay.
They simply shifted their perception.
Okay.
They were told that their work was good exercise.
Oh.
So no changes to their routine, no gym membership.
Wow.
Just this reframing of their existing activity.
That's so cool. It reminds me of that 5-minute room rescue technique I've been trying.
Yeah.
Where instead of getting overwhelmed by like a messy house,
right,
I commit to like tackling just one small cleaning task.
Yeah.
For 5 minutes, and it's amazing how much you can get done.
It's amazing what you can accomplish in those little short bursts.
Yeah.
And I think both of those examples really illustrate this power of, making the change feel smaller.
Right.
Because it's less intimidating for the elephant.
Right.
And, and you create the sense of progress, you build confidence along the way, and you're much more likely to stick with it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
The book also gives the debt snowball as an example of shrinking the change.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, that idea of like paying off your smallest dets first.
Right.
Regardless of interest rates,
Right.
just to get that sense of accomplishment and like keep that momentum going.
Exactly. It's about creating those small wins to fuel, the rest of the change journey.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So it sounds like a big takeaway here is to break down our big, overwhelming goals into those like 5-minute room rescue moments. Like how can we make the change feel less intimidating? How can we create those early wins to kind of keep our motivation going?
Exactly. And, I think the final piece of the puzzle in terms of motivating the elephant is a little bit more nuanced, but it's equally as important.
Okay.
And that is growing your people.
Okay, so now we're moving beyond like individual change.
Yeah.
And now looking at how to inspire others to embrace change too.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the book tells this amazing story about Paul Butler, who was this guy who was really instrumental in saving the endangered St. Lucia parrot.
Okay, parrots, how did he pull that off? Was it some groundbreaking new conservation technique?
It was about conservation, but it was also about something much deeper.
Okay.
And that was identity.
Okay.
He didn't just focus on the bird itself, he focused on the people.
Okay.
And he helped them to see the parrot as this symbol of national pride.
So when people started identifying as like parrot protectors,
Yeah.
then they became more invested in saving the species.
Exactly. They were invested in saving themselves.
Wow.
Who they were.
I love that.
Yeah. And the book also mentions this hospital that used a very similar approach to boost nurse satisfaction. They really focused on kind of the inherent nobility of the nursing profession.
Right.
And, fostering a sense of pride and purpose.
So it's about cultivating a growth mindset.
Yeah.
Helping people to see themselves as capable of change and improvement, and not just for themselves, but for something bigger than themselves.
Yeah. And that's a powerful force for change.
Yeah.
It's not about, telling people to do something. It's about helping them to become someone who wants to do it.
Okay, I love that. And I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together, right?
Yeah.
Directing the writer, motivating the elephant, and now growing your people.
Yeah.
But there's one element we haven't talked about yet, and that's shaping the path. How do we actually make the journey of change easier? How do we make it less resistant to those bumps in the road? That's where we're heading next.
Welcome back. We're continuing our deep dive into Switch and all those really clever strategies for making change stick.
Yeah.
We've explored directing the rider, that logical side, motivating the elephant, our emotional powerhouse.
Right.
But it doesn't end there, right?
It doesn't, there's one crucial element that we haven't explored yet, and that is shaping the path.
Okay.
And this is all about recognizing that our environment, has a huge influence on our behavior, often more than we realize.
Okay. I'm intrigued by this one.
Yeah.
The book opens with this very familiar scenario of, getting cut off in traffic.
Oh, yeah.
And our instinct is always to blame the driver.
Right. What a jerk.
Totally. But what if it's not just about them being a bad driver?
Yeah, and that's where, this thing called the fundamental attribution error comes in.
And this is our tendency to, overemphasize personality when we're explaining behavior and underestimate the influence of the situation.
So maybe that driver who cut me off was having a really bad day.
Yeah.
Or was rushing to the hospital.
Could be.
It's a good reminder to consider the context.
It is. And, this error in thinking, it pops up everywhere, not just on the road.
Right.
We see it in our relationships at work, even in how we view, societal issues. Mm-hmm. And so the Heath brothers argue that, this error often trips us up when we're trying to make changes.
Okay.
We focus on fixing people when actually the path itself needs adjusting.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's about recognizing those external factors that are kind of shaping behavior.
Right.
The book gives that great example of the moviegoers and popcorn.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that study where people, given those larger buckets, ate more popcorn?
Yeah.
Even if it was stale.
Even if it was stale, yeah.
It's crazy how much our environment just kind of nudges us in certain directions.
Totally.
Yeah.
And, the same principle applies in the workplace.
Okay.
They talk about this story of this consulting firm that was really struggling to get employees to submit their timesheets on time.
Okay, classic problem.
Yeah, and they tried everything right, reminders training, even threats. Mm-hmm. Nothing was working.
So they assumed it was like a people problem?
Yeah, that their employees were just, resistant to following the rules.
Right.
But it turned out the problem wasn't the people, it was the path.
Okay.
Their online timesheet system was so clunky and frustrating to use.
Oh, yeah.
And so once they simplified the tool, made it more user-friendly, compliance sword.
Wow. So it's a good reminder to look beyond just the individual behavior and consider how the environment might be hindering change?
Yeah, exactly.
So shaping the path isn't just about changing the physical environment. What are some other strategies that the Heath brothers offer?
Well, one that they really emphasize is the power of habits.
Okay.
Habits are those automatic behaviors we do without even thinking, which makes them incredibly powerful tools for change.
Yeah, that makes sense because they require less conscious effort.
Right.
And so they're not draining our self-control, which we only have so much of.
Exactly.
But how do we actually build new habits? That's something I struggle with.
Yeah, and I think the key is to start small and be specific.
Okay.
And so, the book suggests choosing a very manageable action that you can do every day without fail.
So like making your bed every morning or taking a walk after lunch.
Exactly. And these small actions, they create a sense of accomplishment and momentum.
Right.
Which then paves the way for bigger changes down the line.
It's like the small wins we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, it's all about finding those small, repeatable actions that can very easily become part of our routine.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah. And another powerful strategy for shaping the path is rallying the herd.
Huh?
We humans, we're social creatures.
Yeah.
We're heavily influenced by the behavior of those around us.
So it's like peer pressure.
Kind of, but in a good way.
But in a good way, yeah.
Yeah, and so the book gives this example of a school that successfully reduced bullying.
Okay.
By creating a culture of caring. And so they encouraged students to look out for each other and report any bullying they witnessed.
So they created a new social norm.
Exactly, where bullying was no longer acceptable.
Right, it's like shifting the collective mindset.
Exactly.
Okay.
And, by creating an environment where the desired behavior becomes the expected behavior change, becomes much more likely to stick.
And finally, how do we keep the switch going?
Yeah, that's a great question.
How do we make sure those initial successes don't fade over time?
Yeah, and I think one crucial aspect is celebrating those small wins.
Okay.
Acknowledging the progress.
Yeah.
It's all about keeping the elephant motivated.
Right.
And, reinforcing those positive changes.
It's like giving yourself a pat on the back for every step forward.
Exactly.
What about when things get tough? Are there strategies for kind of staying on track when we inevitably face setbacks?
Yeah, absolutely. The book really emphasizes the importance of building in mechanisms for accountability and support.
Okay.
And so this might involve, finding a mentor, joining a support group, even just having like a buddy system with a friend.
So having a system in place to kind of offer encouragement and help us stay the course.
Exactly. It's much easier to navigate those inevitable bumps in the road when we have that support and accountability.
This deep dive has been so insightful. We've covered so much ground.
We have.
I'm feeling much more equipped to tackle some of those changes I've been putting off.
Good.
What stood out to you the most from our conversation?
For me, it's this reminder that change isn't just about willpower or, making these grand gestures.
Right.
It's really about understanding the interplay between our rational and emotional sides.
Yeah.
And recognizing the power of our environment.
I love that. I love the idea of, finding those bright spots.
Yeah.
And shrinking the change to make it feel less daunting. And I think I'm really going to focus on shaping my path, creating an environment that really supports the changes I want to make.
I love that.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and if you're looking to explore these concepts further, I highly recommend picking up Switch.
Yeah.
It's just full of these really practical strategies and inspiring stories.
Absolutely. So for our listeners, the challenge is this. Think about a change you've been wanting to make.
Yeah.
How can you direct your rider, motivate your elephant, and shape the path to make that change stick? Remember, change is possible. It might not always be easy, but with the right approach,
You got it.
you can make it happen.
That's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
Change is a journey, not a destination.
Ooh, I like that. And that wraps up our deep dive into the surprising science of change.
Yeah.
We hope you found it as thought-provoking and inspiring as we did.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep switching things up.